Hey, Doc Parsley here, and I am bringing, as part of the COVID series, I'm bringing in my pinch hitter and my expert on relationship issues. And thanks for coming on the show, Roy. I really appreciate it. I know it's probably not the best time of the day for you out there, anyway. So Roy's all the way out in Australia, but I wanted to bring Roy in. I want to talk about another aspect of maintaining our health and wellness.
Yeah.
While we're doing this quarantine, if you want to call it quarantine. I argue that it's actually not quarantine, because when quarantine means that you're keeping sick people away from healthy people, we're keeping healthy people away from sick people, or people who might potentially be sick. So it's not quite quarantine, but in sort of the midst of all that, it's changed people's lives significantly. And I've been talking a lot about there's not a whole lot we can do as far as protecting ourselves anymore. We're kind of doing everything that's doable: mask and social distancing and closing retail, and the things we're doing, we can't really do much more. But what people can do is they can take care of their health and make themselves the most robust as possible, so that when they inevitably get exposed to this virus, it has the least chance of making them really ill. The death rate is so low that that's really not even statistically worth thinking about, even though the press has kind of fear-mongered that a little to seeming bigger than it is. But yeah, I thought it'd be great to have you come on and talk about how people, not necessarily prescriptive, like, here's how you fix it, but what you're brilliant at, and what my work with you in the past has been what really it's just understanding how other people are doing it, being able to flip your worldview systematically to see why other people are doing what they're doing, and to understand their behaviors even better than they are. And I think you've broken it down so simplistically. So for the audience who doesn't know Rory, anyone who hasn't heard me talk about Rory already, I met Rory about a year and a half ago in Bali. I want to say, was that like a November, something like that?
September 2018, I think.
Okay. All right. So you would have the date. You're the right guy for that kind of detail. So we met and we did your course, The Invitation of Love, and we'll talk about Roy. We'll talk about your courses throughout the show, and give people a list of ways to find any of your coursework, your live and your online courses. But I met you there. I went out there with the woman I was dating at the time, and we were really interested in making our relationship like the most beautiful, as you say, loving each other beautifully. And I thought that was so powerful. And I know that's sort of blended its way into your work now, which you're calling relational power dynamics. Is that right?
Yeah.
And I've now been to that twice.
Yeah.
Twice. Yes. And the brilliance of it isn't that it's, oh, this is what you do. It's, this is what you're thinking, and why you're perceiving what you're perceiving. And this is most likely how they're perceiving things. And this is most likely what they're thinking, based on the dynamics and the archetypes. And I love archetypal stories, and we can talk about that. But before I drone on too much longer, just so my audience can be introduced to you a little bit, just talk a little bit about how you became a relational expert or researcher, and what does that mean to you? Like, what's the passion behind your work?
Sure. And thank you for having me. It's great to be here. So I was 12 years old. It kind of goes back to 12 years old, which is a very formative age. I've observed for many people. A lot of people make quite big decisions at the age of 12. And I just observed people who said they loved each other being mean to each other. And my sort of sensitive nervous system just thought this was something dreadfully wrong. Like, it didn't make any sense to the young boy that was like, you say you love each other, but you're not being loving. Yeah. And I had a basic understanding of what being loving was. It felt good. And then I had people being cruel and vindictive and nasty. And I just made a decision at age 12 that I was never going to do that to the person I love. I remember making that decision. I'm never doing that to the person that I love. And because of the absoluteness of that decision, it essentially created like a folder in my mind. And I just started filing away everything. I kind of imagine it like, if somebody became utterly fascinated by cars, everything they heard about cars, they'd start filing away, whether it's in a TV advert, in a TV show, or their father talking to someone about the carburetor or something. It was just, you just file it away because it's your fascination. So it's been my fascination now for 34 years. And I find it endlessly fascinating. So I then began, my first area of research was really looking at what I call models of relationship. I observed people who did relationships poorly, which led to suffering and violation. And I observed people doing relationships really well, where there was flourishing, kindness, and respect. And I'm not the first person, but I dived into what are the fundamental underlying beliefs, principles, and assumptions that leads to people being unpleasant with each other? And what are the underlying principles and assumptions that lead people to being generous and kind and respectful to each other? And they're two totally different worlds. They're based on fundamentally different beliefs and assumptions. So I observed what I call the old model of relationship, which is a fear-based, ownership-based model that's barely evolved for 2,500 years, that corrupts people, even good people, into behaving in ways that are very unpleasant to the psyche and the soul and the heart. And then what I think of as a new model of relationship, which is people relate to the other person in a different way. And it's not based in fear, it's not based in ownership, it's based in this sort of profound privilege of being in someone's life. And I find, Mark Manson did a piece of research not long ago, 1,500 people, I think he interviewed, so not a big data set, but sizable enough in my opinion. And everyone who struggles in relationship, they say that the biggest problem is communication. But when you speak to people who have what we think of as mastered relationships, they don't say that the number one thing is communication at all. They say the number one thing is respect. Mm. And respect arises inside of how you relate to someone, which is what's interesting. Most people think, I'll respect you if you behave a certain way.
Right. Conditional respect. And one of the things that I think one of the most profound things I've heard you say, and there's a countless number of them, and there's an array of brilliant things that you've said that just shocked me, and oh my gosh, and I wrote that down. But I love your definition of love as being the most profound form of respect. Mm. And I feel like, as you said, when it's a fear-based and ownership-based, you can't feel respected, even if the other person truly does respect you. You can't feel respected if somebody's trying to control you. They're saying, well, you need to do this, and then you'll get my affection or respect or whatever, attention. Well, that's not love. That doesn't feel like love, even if the other person thinks of that of love. But let's take a step back and go more general. Of course, we want everybody to love thy neighbor. But for right now, I don't know, well, we can chat a little bit about what's going on in Australia. And to clarify any confusion to the audience, yes, that is a British accent, but he lives in Australia right now. So in case you're wondering why he has such a weird Australian accent, he does not. But if we can step back a little and talk about, we over here right now, we have certain, and of course, America isn't homogenous. Like, it's 330 million people, but it's vastly different living in different states. But we have some areas of the country right now where the politicians are encouraging, they're mandating ridiculous restrictions on people's lives. And then they're encouraging literally their neighbors and family to tell the government on them, to tell the law enforcement of the authorities if these people aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing, if they aren't social distancing, if they're, if you see people out in areas where they're supposed to have masks and they don't have masks on, you're supposed to notify the authorities. If your neighbor has a birthday party for their 5-year-old, you're supposed to notify the authorities. This is not respect. I mean,
that's how it all started in East Germany.
Yes.
Long time ago. Hey, just tell us about your neighbor.
Right.
The right thing to do.
Right. And you'll be saving society. You'll be a heroic member of society. Uh, Along the lines of that meme that we talked about right before this started, you were talking about a meme of a fat guy on a couch with potato chips all over him, and and 20 years or 5 years ago he was a couch potato.
2019, total loser. 2020, saving the world.
Saving the world by doing nothing. So what's it like out in Australia? Do you have are people tattling on each other? Are things super restrictive? Like what's it like out there?
What's really interesting about Australia is that most people don't appreciate how big this country is. I wouldn't want you to leave this this podcast right now, but at some point in the future, just search for Australia map over America.
Yeah.
It's vast.
It's an enormous country, just not very populated.
Enormous landmass. So I don't know the exact numbers, so I'm going to get them wrong, but it's essentially, let's just say it's the same amount of people in the United Kingdom as are in Australia, and the landmass is like.
Yeah, and actually I think the UK is considerably bigger. I think it's in Australia only around 20 some odd million. It's like 28, 30 million maybe.
Something like that.
Yeah.
We have
30 million in Texas, just one state here.
Everyone's very spread out, and 90% of people are basically within
a few miles of the ocean.
The coast. Yeah. Everyone's very spread out, but there's only been something like 80 deaths in Australia.
Oh my gosh.
In the whole country. But what's interesting is I'm on a Facebook group of the local community. I'm in the Byron Shire, so I'm on a Facebook group, and the amount of people that are just getting their pain relief out by speaking about other people, I find astonishing. I have basically a rule, which is I don't comment. Doesn't matter. I have this rule. It's like, it doesn't matter how dumb someone is. I don't comment, because it's like, I'm just not going to do it. But all sorts of people are just commenting things. But I think that's just because people are individually in pain.
Yeah. Can you elaborate on that? Like I've heard you talk about that. That's another one of your brilliant phrases, I think, is about a lot of times people's nastiness is actually their pain relief.
Yeah, I think of it. I think it's a lot easier when somebody is acting out. I think it's a lot easier just to observe. Okay, that's just, they're in pain. They have a thorn in their paw, or they're in pain and they need some pain relief. And the pain relief is being nasty, being mean, snapping. Someone comes home and someone's exhausted and tired and they're frazzled. They just have a snap. And the loving person's okay, they're low resource, like they're in pain, they're struggling. How can I just ignore that? Because it's not their normal code of conduct. How can I just ignore that, soothe them, pick up the baby, empty the bin, sit them down, say, hey, do you want to share what's going on with your day? Just like, it's like to not take it personally, which I know is not easy in every circumstance, but most people react in a spiky way because they're in pain themselves. The age-old idea is, like the head of the household bully. I don't normally talk gender, but like the husband hits the wife hits the kid kicks the cat. It's kind of a clumsy way of pointing, like it just goes down the pecking order.
Right.
So if somebody's struggling at home and they can just write something nasty and dismissive online, and they'll do that. But Australia is doing really, really well. To come back to the original question, there's a kind of, where I live, there's a sort of everyone's being told to stay apart from each other. But there's so much space in Australia. Very few people are leaving their front door and getting into a lift in an apartment block.
Right.
Where you can't avoid people. So everyone's sort of got their own house, their own driveway. And unless you go on your weekly shop, you're not getting it. I'm not going anywhere near anyone. I don't have any need to.
Well, you're like me and most of my friends, is that we've been social distancing for a long time anyway, just because we work from home and I don't have that many places to go. So, I go grocery shop. Basically what it's disrupted for me is going to a restaurant once a week or something, which is about maybe as much as I would do it. Probably not even that much, but that's about the only disruption for me.
The gym and the restaurant. Yeah.
Yeah. So, it sounds like you guys don't have the nastiness out there that we have here. But this is my concern. So two things that I see. One, I think what disheartens me the most is the way people are attacking each other. So there's a big fear-based population right now. And obviously my expertise is in in physiologic, biological health. And I trust your expertise on kind of helping people keep emotionally and psychologically safe in the aspect of relationships right now. So what's disheartening to me is the way that humans are interacting with each other on the street right now. It really feels super confrontational. If you just get close enough to somebody, they look at you as though you're threatening them, if you aren't behaving the way they believe you should behave, they're upset with you. If you don't believe what they believe, and I draw the line at people who are saying, well, this whole thing is a hoax and it's made up and it doesn't exist. Like that's too far for me. But we don't know a lot, right? So there are very legitimate differences in narratives that have equal chances of being accurate, right? It could be true that this virus is the worst thing that's ever hit mankind and we need to be extra careful with it. But it could also be true that this is just something novel we don't really know how to deal with, but the overall toll of it to the human species, getting away from what we do to ourselves economically, but the biological toll to the human species is probably going to be like every other respiratory illness that we've dealt with over time. And we don't know how to deal with it. Therefore, it's novel and therefore it's more scary. But you aren't even allowed to say that narrative, right? If you question that narrative, if you say, well, I'm not sure this is Armageddon. I mean, there's a chance that we've overreacted out of fear, and not to criticize anybody, but maybe it's time to put let's dip our toe back into the deep end of the pool and start figuring out what other ways we could work. So that's the disheartening part. So maybe start with your how I'd like you to start. You can start however you want to. You can blow me off, Yeah, this is a normal conversation for us. But I think if you could describe what leads to somebody sort of, for lack of a better word, selecting their archetype early in life, and then kind of what the archetypes are. And then we can probe into how that's playing out and what I consider the most concerning aspect, just because I'm exposed to it more. We can talk about how that could be useful in the way people are interacting with each other, and then we can go into the home. So just start with what is an archetype, how does it come about, and then what are the archetypes that you teach?
Okay, great. Because I'm going to start at the macro level because of what you just said. So first of all, for anyone who's not familiar with the term archetype, so archetype is, we think of it as a universal psychic structure. So what we mean by that is it is an aspect of the human psyche that is common to all people. And what we mean again then is that, so we think of it as classically four major archetypes: sovereign, warrior, magician, lover. And to put those into sort of more modern terminology, leader, winner, creative, and empath will be the sort of another four words that might help people understand what we mean. Another way of saying that is that there's a part of us that likes being in the left brain, likes detail, likes organizing, scheduling, taking care of the systems of a household or a business or a community or whatever. That's the sovereign energy. There's another part of us that's also in the left brain that likes to win, goal-oriented, focused, deals with issues, doesn't like to lose, and is very much a good arbiter, and they're on it, right? Those are the two left brain realms. The magician realm or the creative realm is very much in the unknown what. It doesn't like being in the left brain, likes being in the senses, likes being in music, architecture. They like to give people wow experiences. They know it's the part of us that can have right brain creative experiences, which is another aspect of the human condition. And then the fourth part, then the lover or the empath, is very much about connection, the body, the heart, the part of us that we know if we can shut our left brain off enough. And many of you, if you're listening, you'll know this experience. Like if you've ever had a hug or a cuddle with someone that you feel really, really safe with, you drop out of your brain and you go into something that's like, doesn't have really words for it. So they care about connection. So these are 4 aspects of the human condition that we can all be familiar with. Makes sense, right? Left brain, right brain, body.
And so before you go on, another division I think is really powerful. I think I heard it first in your course, but I've heard it recently in the last couple of years that the left brain is basically focusing on what's known and what can be measured, and the right brain is focused on the unknown and the novel. Is that right? So then the lover and magician, they're dealing with a different, maybe a different sort of narrative or different narrative around the perception. So they're focusing on the perception, not of the senses. So like what's coming in, they're trying to make that a beautiful experience, as opposed to the left brain is trying to ascribe a meaning to that and say, this is meaning, and so we need to do that with it. Is that basically right?
It's very good. Yeah. So the left brain is essentially deals with the known world, data, logistics, stuff. That's what makes them feel reassured and safe.
Right.
And that's why people who are really strong in their left brains, they struggle more when they have a belief system crash. So when they have a set of beliefs that they're holding on to and that they think is true, and then new information is presented that destabilizes that, and they have a belief system crash between the old set of beliefs, the new set of beliefs, they can find this particularly destabilizing. Whereas the lover and the magician are like, oh yes, that's not true anymore. It's quite easy. So the reason why this is interesting is because these psychic structures occur both on a national level, but also on a very personal level.
Right.
And they also happen on a community level, because they just do. So
I could actually see it as you're saying this. I don't want to get you off your train of thought, but it just occurred to me that it's actually a really good way, and I know different countries call them different things, but here in America, you have the very liberal, what we call the far left, and the far right is very conservative. The more conservative people are, the more data driven they are. They're the ones going, well, are we really doing the right thing? What does the science say? Have we overreacted? Let's analyze this. And then you have the left brain people, because we're looking for, can we conserve what we used to have if we're right brained? And if we're left brained, we're looking for, given everything changes and we're completely rewriting the narrative, what's the new narrative right now?
Yeah.
And if you're holding on to the old narrative, then you're being ridiculous. And the right's going, if you're developing a completely new narrative, then you're being ridiculous. It's kind of occurs to me. So I don't know.
I look at it sort of like when I think about the diagram that I've created and these 4 archetypes. And when I think about them let's just talk about it at a national level for a moment. So when I take the time to look at various countries and I think about it, there are some countries like very clear, okay, that is a foxy magician kind of country. And then you can see like there are very, very sovereign countries that are very processed, detailed, rigorous, like Germany. You kind of think of it like the way they do processes and organization. When I think about America, and I'm aware that I'm not American, so I don't want to offend anybody listening, but this is just how I see it, is that when I think about the immigrants that populated America over the last 500 odd years or more, whatever the number is, I apologize. The kind of people that are willing to get on a boat and travel over oceans to a foreign land to start a new business, they're the winners. They're not the gentlefolk.
Right.
The gentlefolk aren't planning that trip. They're staying right where they are in their village. So the kind of people that came, that founded and created America, are people who are aggressive. They want to win. So the American dream is exactly that. It's the dream of winning. So the whole country is essentially founded and formed by the psychic structure that is willing to cross oceans, and they want to win. Now, why does that matter, Rory? Well, that matters because you live in a very arbitration type, judgmental, punitive country. Like I'm a rugby man, for those of you that know rugby. So I'm a little sad that we don't have any fighting on the rugby pitch anymore, but I understand we've had to evolve. Kids are playing rugby. There's no more punching on the rugby pitch. You get sent off. In America, baseball, the dugouts are clearing,
yeah,
bullpens are clearing. fights, right? Ice hockey, fights. No more fighting in American football, which is interesting. But you live in a world where in America, people are hostile to each other on the street. If you are not obeying certain rules that I think you should be obeying, people just can be nasty.
Right.
So I observe, and like I have amazing experiences in America. I've been to spent a lot of time up in New England, in New Hampshire. There's communities up there that are absolutely stunning, and they're very kind and very gentle folk, right? But as a whole, people get in fights in America. People shout at each other in America. They're harsh with each other.
Especially on Twitter.
Yeah, and I'm like, this for me represents the warrior archetype on a national level.
Yeah, let's describe the archetypes better. One, like on an individual level, like and you can extrapolate to the country, but just so the audience understands what we're talking about when you're talking about the way you phrased them now, the leader, and those are all actually new, which I haven't heard you say that. The leader and the empath, and So what leads to somebody having an archetype?
Okay.
And then what's characteristic of those archetypes? Like, how do those archetypes exist? And like, how do we observe those? What behaviors do we know? Oh, that's that kind of archetype. And then I think it'd be easier for people to follow our conversation about this later.
Absolutely fine. So if you're listening at home, this is a good question for you. Okay. So when we're a child, to answer your question, is there's two ways that I see that archetypes arise naturally in children. First is they're essentially born with it. So there's a premise which is everyone leans towards one of them. That's the first premise. And the second one, therefore, is either we're born with it. And how do we know this? Well, we know that all children are not born the same.
Right.
And we know that they have certain characteristics. And this is particularly extrapolated from the study of twins. So in a lot of twins, same DNA, same parents, same birthday, everything's the same, obviously, right? But one twin is the first into the dark closet to go and find mummy's slipper, the first to laugh out loud when somebody trips over, the first to bang their plastic fork when they finish their food and they want more, the first to notice mummy didn't like that. I quite liked it that mummy didn't like that, you know. Then there's the other twin, much more timid. Can I go in the closet? Am I allowed to touch mummy's slipper? I've finished my food. Is there any more? Mummy's upset. I'm terrified mummy's upset. I don't know why, but I am. So in the study of twins, different twins is very clear. The other way, so in other words, we can be born leaning into a particular archetype as a characteristic, as a nature of our character. But the other way archetypes are created and formed is through imbalanced primary caregivers. So if, for example, you have a primary caregiver that is disproportionately aggressive, and angry, maybe violent, maybe has a fierce temper, maybe drinks a bit, it's likely that the children in that household, or you as a child, will be very quiet, very cautious, very mindful of the mental climate of that particular parent. They'll be good at appeasing and placating and being nice and being thoughtful and being, their awareness will be all about what's going on outside of me.
And that's the empath.
And that's typically, that'll be the lover, the gentle child will be to survive the overbearing energy of a harsh bully energy. Let's say you've got somebody who's a very imbalanced sovereign energy, strict, controlling, disciplinarian. Everybody has to do things by this time, shouting at the other parent. Everything has to be done their way, otherwise nobody's happy, right? That child is more and more likely going to not feel safe to tell the truth. They're going to learn to be more and more slippery, more and more creative, more and more, just to survive the overbearing domination. And that's what I think of as the magician, and I call that the fox. The survival archetypes is what my research was about. So when I use animal names because it makes it really simple. Even 5-year-olds can understand it. The fox is cunning and sly, and it doesn't like being cornered, and it can be slippery, and it can be clever, and it doesn't like being controlled. It likes freedom. Right. So very, very overbearing, controlling parents going to elicit within a child that kind of, I don't like being controlled, and therefore I present a certain way. Likewise, to flip that, if a child is born in a house where there's no boundaries, there's no rules, boyfriends or girlfriends come and go. Sometimes there's food on the table, sometimes there isn't. Sometimes the fridge is empty. Sometimes mom or dad is passed out high on the couch. I don't know, right? But no control. That's going to elicit the controlling, organizing, sovereign, what I call the gorilla energy. If I don't organize things, I'm going to die. I've got to take charge. I'm the only adult in the house, said the 7-year-old.
Right.
And that's going to form that kind of sovereign energy. If I don't control my environment and get organized, I'm going to die.
Right.
The fox, opposite to that, is if I tell the truth, I'm going to die. And
right.
if I'm controlled, I'm going to die. The sheep, which is the lover survival archetype, grows up in a household where it's like, if I answer back, if I defend myself, if I speak up, I'm going to be annihilated. So I'm just going to be quiet. I'm not going to speak up. I'm not going to have any boundaries. I'm just going to be a good boy and take my punishment and keep it as simple as possible. The wolf, on the other hand, is often, they're either dealing with, and it can be any form, but it can be also aggressive behavior, but it can also be slippery behavior or weak energy. The bystander energy is what forms the wolf. It says, if I don't speak up, I'm going to be annihilated. If I don't yell at my older brothers that I'm having some food, there won't be any food at the table. If my older brother picks on me, if I don't deal with this, they're going to pick on me even more. So the warrior energy, which I call the wolf, they understand checking and balancing. They understand if someone is acting out, if I let them get away with it, it's going to be bad. And they learn this from a young age. So then they spend the rest of their lives like, hey, speaking up is great, saves my life. But you speak to a sheep, they're like, speaking up, it's when I die. Can't speak up.
Right.
So now we're beginning to see this diagram of the sovereign and the gorilla and the fox. Left brain, order, focus, organization, controlling. The fox is like, no, chaos, unknown world, joining up the dots, music, poetry, comedy, architects, all coming from creative energy, which cannot be controlled. You can't say to a musician, okay, now I want you to sit down and write a song right now. It's just not how it works. They'll write the song when the song comes out.
Right.
And the sheep and the wolf, so we're talking about this dynamic tension now. This is such a fundamental piece of this puzzle. The sheep, the gentle folk, they don't want conflict. They don't speak up. They want to soothe and they want to placate and they want everyone to feel good, the village, the flock. We want everyone in the community to feel safe and nobody gets told off and we're all doing our best and we're all going to be gentle with each other. And the wolf is like, what? No, I have to speak up. If I don't speak up, I'm going to die. So the wolf type energy is like they want to deal with the issue. So let's say, I don't know, somebody says, can you be quiet in the morning? I've got to sleep in. And somebody makes a loud noise and the wolf wakes up and that person leaves the house. When they come home at the end of the day, like they have to talk about being woken up early and how to not have it happen again. And then they can relax and have a nice evening with their lover. And their lover's like, what? You're starting the evening by telling me off that I woke you up this morning? Like, how am I supposed to be intimate with you for the rest of the day? Mm-hmm. These two totally opposing ways that we handle the world.
I like the way you said it. I think it was I think I heard it in London the first time I went through the dynamics of power. I keep messing it up. Relational power dynamics?
Yeah, or the balance of power was the name.
Oh, that's what it was called at the time. That's my confusion. It was the balance of power. So the first time I went to that, I loved the way you said that was the sheep needs the connection before it can handle the conflict, and the wolf needs to handle the conflict before it can connect. Is that about right?
Exactly right. So sheep need connection first, and then can we gently talk about why you might be frustrated with me as gently as possible, and then I'll apologize and hopefully it'll go away and I won't feel bad, because sheep feel traumatized if someone's cross or upset with them.
Right.
Because it triggers how they felt as a child typically.
Right.
And it just goes against their entire, it's not just a value system, it's their entire internal nervous system world. The way their entire nervous system is set up is if someone's cross with me or irritated with me, it's traumatizing. So we have to have connection. And then if you can tell me something that you're upset about, please tell me gently. The wolf is like, I have to talk about my issue first, then we'll connect. Right. So the sheep is connection first, second. The wolf is issue first, connection second. A wolf cannot relax when there's an undealt with issue. And then because the wolf thinks, we'll just deal with it and move on.
Right.
The sheep like, I can't deal with it and move on. I'm going to think about this for days.
Right.
I'm going to be suffering about this for days. If you just come in heavy-handed and be like, I'm really pissed off with you about waking me up this morning. Can you not do that again? Now the wolf thinks, I've just burped. Oh, better out than in. And now we can crack on with the evening. And the sheep are like, you've just slapped me across the face.
Right.
I can't relax. And the wolf just said, I just had a burp. It's great.
And I think it's important for anyone listening to realize that this is not a conscious decision to be a wolf or a gorilla or a fox or a sheep. Like this happens during your development and you don't have conscious control over it. So therefore the person that you're having conflict or upset with also has no control over this, but they're not really aware of it.
No. So now let's take this as genius. Okay. So let's now take this into the current situation, isolation, lockdowns, people stuck in homes. And for those of you that don't know, in Wuhan, the divorce applications for divorce skyrocketed after the quarantine. Why? They skyrocketed because people were stuck with no escape valve from the dysfunction of their partners. And it's like laid out for all to bear. It's like, I can't live with this person for the rest of my life. Like their dysfunction is too much. Now, I don't work with unconscious, unpleasant human beings. Let's just try and simplify that. So who do I work with? I work with kind, well-meaning, benevolent people who on any normal day wake up and they want to do right by people. The bus driver, the waitress, their husband, their kids. And they're not perfect and they're not going to be great all the time, but that's who they fundamentally are under no pressure. So when I imagine two kind, well-meaning, benevolent people who want to do right by each other, struggling, okay, that's who I want to work with, right? Because I know that their hearts are in the right place and they have integrity and they don't want to be a mean and unpleasant, unconscious person. So when we think about two people like that stuck in a house and they're really struggling, I would assert that understanding these archetypes is going to take away definitely over 70% of the confusion, the struggle, and the misery, maybe higher. And then you're just going to be left with your natural maturation process, which is challenging and tricky. So you've got this is the stuff that we have to deal with whether we like it or not. It's just called natural life and growing. And then there's this much that is the unnecessary stuff because we simply have totally opposing value systems and nervous systems based around our survival archetypes. So why is this interesting? Because by understanding the survival archetypes, we begin to understand, most importantly, the way we are wired. Why do I handle breakdowns the way I handle breakdowns? Nobody ever asks this question. So what happens is we're going along in life and we've got all of our...
Can you define breakdown for the audience? I don't know if that's a British term, but I've only learned that from working with you.
Okay, so breakdown is my umbrella term for upsets, irritations, disconnections, fights, arguments, cold shoulder. Just that whole... A breakdown is when we're not in connection and we're not feeling love for each other. We are now... breakdown is that's my umbrella term for all of that stuff. Right? Okay. You guys probably call it having a fight, but lots of people
conflict. But I think it's a little deeper than conflict because it's the absence of the connection as a breakdown as well.
Yeah. In other words, when you're not at your loving best with your partner. So what's really, really interesting is that and this will be for everyone who's listening right now, you'll know this for your own self. When you have a fight or a breakdown, afterwards, as you come back, so what happens is when we get out of our center, we have a lot of stress hormones. Our cortisol goes up and the other stress hormones, and our IQ comes down because, as you very well know, because you've explained this to me, our prefrontal cortex essentially goes offline, which is our rational decision-making part of our brain. So we have a fight and then we come back, the stress goes away and our IQ comes back up and then we carry on. But most people are not, because our prefrontal cortex comes off, we're not aware of how we behave when we're not in our center. And it's so normal and so familiar and so, very importantly, justified that the way we handle our fights, we never question it. And I'm talking about smart, intelligent, well-meaning, introspective, considerate people. They have fights with their partners and they never ever stop and revisit. How did I behave? Is that normal? Does my brother behave like that? How did my wife behave? Maybe she behaved differently. Oh, this is all very interesting. No one ever has that conversation.
And another thing I love about a term you just threw out there, which I know is just reflexive to you, and you just say it all the time, but being in your center. I understood that differently in the Invitation of Love than I did after I learned the balance of power. It's like, oh no, that's actually the center of all four archetypes. You're like right in the middle, to where you can see you're basically you're all of those and you're none of those, right? You have the resources of all of those when you're in your center, and you have the ability to use them or not use them. Is that about right?
It's close. I would say it slightly differently, but it's very close. I would say that what I mean by being in your center is you've got all your IQ. You're not triggered. You're not hooked by someone's jab, your mother-in-law telling you to drive carefully, your mother telling you to drive carefully when you're 35 years old. Maybe that triggers you, right? There's just whatever triggers you and gets you off your center, off balance, leaning over one foot. That's when your IQ starts coming down and you start reverting to your machinery, your autonomic nervous system machinery. For some people, it's getting angry and cross and shouting. Some people, it's going mute, not participating, disconnecting love, and sulking. Some people, they become the sovereign, the gorilla. They become bossy and controlling and righteous and entitled. And everybody has to do what you say when you say it, and then you'll be okay.
Right.
And for the fox, it's basically not talking straight, diffusing, distorting, denying, deflecting, gaslighting, just causing chaos. Because
and you've been doing this your whole life to such an extent that you don't realize that you're doing it, and you believe that everybody else is processing the information the way you are. Yeah.
And the justification is like this: people don't even question the way they handle their upsets. It's so you said it perfectly. So you've been doing it for however old you are. You've been doing it for that long. You're basically a gold medal Olympian at how you do upsets.
Right.
And you never ever question your strategy, because it's the strategy that saved your life as a kid.
And even if you didn't have a traumatic childhood, like what I pointed out to several people when I was helping you facilitate the second power dynamics that I went to, I totally lost my train of thought. Sorry.
You were just saying how you explained about the childhood, about how.
Oh, right. So you have this upset in childhood, which you believe, when you're a child, you believe could be fatal or extremely dangerous. And so even though you lived maybe a great life, you had like all the luxuries of life, and you had, kind, benevolent parents, you still believed that certain things were so dangerous that it was essentially the end of your life if something happened or didn't happen in a certain way. Even as an adult, you would look back and go, well, that was completely trivial. But as a child, it could be life altering if you make a mistake that allows you not to go to Disneyland. Like your parents punish you. Oh, you don't get to go to Disneyland now. That's the kind of death. That's saving your life, is getting yourself to go to Disneyland.
Yeah, I'm not a child expert, but I'm familiar with some of the fundamentals. And essentially, for the first 6 years, children are they might as well be on LSD. I mean, they're just like on and on. They're just making stuff up, and they can't distinguish between mum and dad are separating and it's not my fault. That's the classic one, right? So the one is children can't differentiate. They can't make the differentiation that it's not my fault.
Right.
Because they, at that age, everything's the same. Everything's connected. It's all just that, right? So in a similar way, children, there's some interesting studies where they get to watch really intense emotional episodes of soap operas, right? Like 5-year-olds. And then they're asked what happened. And they're like, well, the lady had some potatoes and she didn't want to share them. And it's making up just total fantasy, crazy. Actually, there was some affair and there's this raging fight about some extramarital affair, and the kids are just like la 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 la, la just
Yeah.
whatever's going on. So the point I'm making is, children process events totally different. One event might be just staggeringly serious, and they'll just make it mean that somebody didn't share their potatoes. Then on another level, an adult will think this is just minor, you know, and they will make it be the end of the world. So the point is, you cannot not screw up your kids, because it's just part of the human condition. Kids are they're going to make stuff up in their minds that is really traumatic. And either way, we end up with, from my research, almost everyone that I've ever dealt with leans strongly in one of these four survival archetypes, and they're familiar with it. A couple of people have changed over the years, but they're familiar with it. They can see when they were younger, yeah, that is exactly the way you've just described that survival archetype. That's exactly how I spent the first, 20 years of my life. But the vast majority of people do not change. They're just familiar with one of these survival archetypes. And just to be clear, you can be a different archetype at work, professionally, whatever you do in your career. You can express a different set of characteristics. But what I'm most interested in as a relationship researcher is, how do you operate at home with your partner when there's a fight?
Right.
Because that's where you're most invested.
Right.
Maybe if you put all your money into a business project, 50-50 with a business partner, and you begin to have colliding approaches to life. But nowhere are you more invested than the person that you're potentially having children with, or marrying, or living with.
Right.
And that's where for me, that's where your true survival archetype shows up. What you do at work is interesting, but it's not where the answers are. You basically learned some skills to handle the situation that you're in at work. It's at home.
Yeah, and I was really fascinated to learn that when I did your course, and I think that people kind of maybe look at those as spirit animals, like which one do you really want to be, and there are people that, and I think there's probably a proclivity for men to want to be a gorilla or a wolf, right? But to your point, I had a really hard time deciding during that exercise, which I was, and this was after you'd spent hours explaining the different archetypes, and then we had to sort of go through that worksheet where we were talking about where do we feel like we kind of chose our archetype, like what were we experiencing as a child that made us. And then it was, sitting and looking at the diagram and going, okay, is that true for me? Like, if I think I'm a wolf, but the point to what you just said is, professionally, I'm a wolf. Like, I want to win. Like, I don't feel like I'm angry and nasty really, but I'm very, I'm very determined to assert my will and get what I want. And that's the professional me. But actually, at home, I'm a sheep. Like, in intimate relationships and with my children and, and with my friends, I'm a sheep. Like, I'm a lover, I'm a connector. I want everybody to have a good time. I want to keep the peace. I want everything to be nice and settled and happy, but I'm both. I can do both. Yeah. And I hopefully we'll get into this in a bit, but, the balance of all the archetypes is where the true, joy of life, where it gets really juicy, is when you have the capabilities of being in all of those, and you're balanced. And the ones that I really didn't have was the leader, the gorilla archetype, the sovereign. And we talked a lot about that. And you gave me a book to read, the King Within. Is that right? Yeah. So that was fascinating. So there's obviously no way we're going to communicate all the brilliance of your work in this short bit of a time. But I think what, as much as I can be an impartial viewer, and I'm trying to listen to you talk as though it's the first time I've ever heard you talk, because that's going to be true for most of the audience. But I think there's a really powerful thing that you say all the time that I believe is, it's critical to understanding this before you can understand why you need to understand the archetypes. And that's about power corrupts. And then the flip of that. So can you cover that?
Yeah, I'd love to. So going back to your earlier point for a second, what's really powerful is that I'm a recovering sheep.
Mm.
So when I stand and I lead my workshops, and there's some, one or two people who are like, well, I don't want to admit that. I want to go and pretend I'm a wolf or a gorilla. Say, no, I'm not. Hey, I'm a recovering sheep. So you can put your looking good down. Don't you worry about it. There's no value in not going to the group that is truly what's going on at home. So one of the things that I discovered in my work, so I spent about 5 years in the greatest research experience of my life with my mentor in my 30s, uncovering all of this information. And why it was so powerful is because I was able to explain to him this world that was also his siblings, that he could never understand. He was able to explain to me the world, because he's a wolf, the world of the wolves, to help me understand a couple of my former business partners that I had struggled with, and also other people that I'd struggled with. And one of the things that we concluded is, for those that have studied geopolitics on any level, there's a very famous phrase, which is very familiar, which is power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. But what I discovered through this research that I did was that there is the other side of that statement that no one ever talks about. And I've discovered recently that Jordan Peterson has mentioned it, and there's one other person that I heard who's mentioned it. But for the majority of and this is only like in the last 12 months, but I've been doing this for 12 years. I've never heard anybody really speak about it. But the other side of that coin is that weakness therefore corrupts. And weakness therefore, absolute weakness therefore corrupts absolutely. And why is this so important? Because weakness is corrupting. And what do we mean by that? It's like, if you're a nice guy, a nice person, the gentle folk, and you don't like to deal with issues, and so one of the ways you know that this is who you are is that you don't like being disliked. Mm. If somebody dislikes you or hates you, it's very challenging for you. This is one of the many good markers that will help you understand, oh yeah, this could be me.
Not that you don't like being disliked, because I think probably anyone healthy doesn't like being disliked, but it's not traumatizing to you if somebody
disproportionately affects you.
Yeah.
Makes you think about it, obsess about it, lose a bit of sleep about it. You have fantasy conversations in your mind for hours. That's another measure. Like, do you find yourself having conversations with somebody that was cross with you for hours, where you set things right, but you never ever have that conversation? Right. So wolves don't have that. They just, that was last week. That was an hour ago. Why are you?
That was yesterday. I don't remember that.
What are you talking about? And the sheep, I have to talk to you about this. I can't move on until we've dealt with this. Like, okay. But weakness is inherently corrupting. It's inherently irritating. And you may not even realize it. So a really simple example is like, if you're on a date with somebody and you say, where do you want to go? Oh, wherever you want to go. Okay, what about this? Oh, you choose. Let's say that goes on for like 10, 15 questions. Well, you're just irritated now because you're not speaking for yourself.
Yeah.
Like, I can't date you. This is a shambles.
Right.
I'm going to call my friend who set me up with you. This is ridiculous. So this is very, very, in the center of power dynamics is power and domination and submission, and power and weakness. And wherever there is an imbalance in that area, people get corrupted. So tyranny arises inside of unchecked power. Mm-hmm. This is why in the House of Commons, in the debating chamber of the United Kingdom, they have two yellow lines along the carpet, which are both an arm's length and a sword's length. So 2 arms and 2 swords lengths apart. So you can stand there in the old days with your sword. The swords don't touch. Okay, so we have to debate. This is a debating chamber. I've lost my way. I get carried away sometimes. So the point is, in the United Kingdom Parliament, there is an opposition. There has to be an opposition.
Right.
Because otherwise, unchecked power. I'll give you a very simple example. In the United Kingdom, you have the opposition and they check and balance each other. And then they created their own rules for expenses, and no one checked and balanced each other. And almost every single member of Parliament in the United Kingdom for a period of time was a benefit cheat, basically stealing money from the taxpayer money, because there's no checking and balancing.
Right.
So we know that this is the nature of human beings, is we're all highly corruptible. So why does this matter? In the home, if you're listening to this and you recognize yourself as one of the gentlefolk who likes connection first and issue second.
And just as a quick aside, don't lose your train of thought, but the individual who is very submissive, let's say, right? So
Yeah.
leaning towards
Doesn't
that
speak.
that area of the that corner of the diagram, basically people down there, these are like the government saying you have to stay home. They're like, okay, we'll stay home. I'm good. Like, you have to wear a mask. Okay, absolutely, no problem. You have to wear goggles. Okay, yep, whatever you say. You can't work for the next 6 months. Yep, all right, if that's what you say, right? Because like too malleable makes that problematic and frustrating to the people who are on the other end of the quadrant going, well, wait a second, is there proof about this? Why do I have to do this? Are we sure? Right? Okay, so I'm sorry, I just want to...
No, and it's a very, so just to finish that previous point then, so, or maybe you're listening to this and you're like, hey, I sound like a wolf. I don't mind barking. I have to deal with the issue and then I can relax. Okay, if you're in a relationship with somebody that isn't like that, you'll notice that when you have breakdowns, that if we don't understand this, the breakdowns are, the frequency is high, they're long, and the intensity is often deep. So what we're trying to do, so another way of saying this, okay, why does this matter, Rory, Kirk? Why are you telling me all this? Well, if you understand these archetypes, you A, understand who you are, B, you understand who your partner is, and if you have children, almost more importantly, you understand how your children are showing up in the world. Because more often than not, violation occurs when a child presents with their own survival archetype that's not consistent with the family survival archetype. Right. So you can have a family which like very wolf. Everybody speaks up, the mother, the father, everyone there, blazing rows, no problem, you get it all out. And then you have a child that's gentle. You can see how easy their violation is there. Like, man up, be a man. Like, why don't you just fucking... Right. And the gentle child is like, what is going on? They can't function, right? And then likewise, you can have a gentle family, and then you have a child who's like a wolf, and they're going to start pushing every boundary, and they're going to try and take over because they want to be the little prince, then they want to become the little king, and then they want to become the tyrant. So you can see how when we don't understand this, it causes violation and corruption in the parenting dynamic, but in the partnership dynamic, it creates crazy making, misery, violation, and confusion. Like, it's a baffling mystery. So understanding these survival archetypes reduces a massive reduction in the frequency, duration, and intensity of the misery of your relationship. And it's not an overstatement to say this at all. Like, my clients, the people that do this work, they report massive reductions in the misery of their relationships. And then they're just left with, like I said earlier, just the normal breakdowns. Because the mystery's gone. It's like, oh, you're running on a totally different operating system.
Right.
My operating system looks and sounds like this. This is what, oh my goodness, yours is totally different. Okay, how do you want me to speak to you when I'm frustrated? Okay, oh my God, I had no idea. Like, it's just like...
Yeah, it's sort of like the love languages, but I think, more, I feel like it's deeper because it gets to not only the way people prefer things, but maybe why people are the way they are. And I'm going to really put you on the spot here, and we haven't talked about this ahead of time, and it might be a little too much for this. And as you know, as I've already said, there's no way to communicate. No matter how long we did this, we wouldn't be able to communicate all of the genius of your work. But I remember very distinctly, it was even shocking to you the first time you did Balance of Power. But I remember the power of the exercise where. So if people understand the foundation of what you're saying right now, and if they're under the delusion that, and understanding what you just said right now is going to make it to where they no longer have conflict in their life. So of course, first of all, like you said, the breakdowns are always going to happen to some degree. That doesn't mean they have to be severe, and as you say, break porcelain. Yeah. But we did an exercise where everybody got into their groups, and they had the wolves and the sheeps and the foxes and the gorillas. And everybody was broken apart, and we had to, or maybe we were doing this as individual. We had to think about what is the most triggering thing that can happen in our life that brings out the most severe version of our archetype.
Yeah.
And then knowing what I know now, knowing that I'm a wolf, or knowing that I'm a sheep, say, being attacked by a wolf. Now that I understand why the wolf is the way the wolf is, and I understand why I am the way I am, how do I respond to that?
Yes.
And nobody knows. Nobody had the slightest clue. And you and I talked about that extensively afterwards, and it became obvious that, well, yes, if they understood this, then they wouldn't be having the struggle wouldn't be so disarming or disruptive to their lives, because they understood it and they'd be able to work their way out of it. But it was complete absence of any beginning. It was marvelous. And maybe you can speak to kind of how you're doing this now and what you've learned from it. But I just remember, I mean, it was almost a sensation of terror in the room when people wrote out their conflict and what they're thinking. And okay, now what do I say? And you could just see the blanket loss of trust. Everybody going, I don't have any idea. Like, I don't have any idea how not to do this. I understand what Rory said. I've been listening to him talk for 12 hours about this. I get it. I have no idea how to stop myself from doing this.
Yeah. This points to two really great things. So thank you for reminding me of that exercise. So yeah, just because you understand everything, there's basically no neural pathways that have been formed as to how to deal with an archetype that you don't understand. So the other premise is this: you have no idea about these other archetypes. People, you listening at home.
Yeah.
The vast majority of people, and I've run this by hundreds of people now, like it's an absolute revelation when you start describing this other world. It's like our survival archetype is an absolute paradigm, and we only understand the world through it. It's very, very fascinating. And it's because it's the only thing that we know. And that's why when you marry somebody who's not the same archetype as you, it's baffling. And you fail to interpret their behavior accurately. It's almost impossible to interpret their behavior as benevolent, because it's not consistent with the way that you think the world should be, that people should behave well.
Right.
So that's the first thing. The second thing then is we don't form neural pathways through experience of handling those people through the way they need to be handled, if that makes sense. So the sheep needs to be handled a certain way, and the wolf needs to be handled a certain way, and they're not the same. So when a wolf speaks, the way you handle a wolf is totally different to the way that the sheep thinks that they should handle it.
Right.
Totally different. And then you say, okay, so how should you handle it? And I have no idea. I've just got no idea. There was a second point that I was going to say on the back of this. Yes. So here's the thing that Joseph Campbell and Carl Jung and many of the others pointed to, that all points to this point right here, is this: you can't figure this out on your own. You have to have mentors. You have to have elders. You have to have Yoda. We cannot. So there's this sort of a famous expression, which is you cannot solve the problems that you've got right now with the level of awareness that created them.
Right.
You need to go speak to somebody who's got more awareness to help you demystify and untangle the confusion of the problem that you're dealing with at this level of awareness, right? But the thing about the understanding these power dynamics and survival archetypes is that you cannot figure out the other ones on your own. You just can't. It took me 5 years, averaging 6 to 9 hours a day. It was thousands and thousands of hours with a wolf in a wolf's den before I understood what was going on. And I'm talking committed inquiry every day, hours.
And even if I remember correctly, even actually practicing being a wolf, like creating a dialogue between you and, I don't know if we want to say his name, but between you and Gil. You actually would engage deliberately engage in dialogue that would require you to be a wolf and respond to him in a wolf pattern.
We did essentially wolf training, which is also known as shouting training.
Yeah,
where you just start at level 1, and somebody says, like, I'm a bit pissed off with you. And then you have to respond in a way that you retain your center. And for a sheep like me, like, that's tremendously difficult on day one. Yeah. When you get to day 500 and you're practicing level 9, now obviously you could probably do it in less time, but like level 9 is like full bore shouting.
Right.
Because stress inoculation helps.
Right.
And all 4 of the archetypes have a healing path, essentially, which I'm not going to go into here because it's not appropriate.
Right.
But all of the 4 archetypes have a path that restores their center. And it's nothing short of saving your own life. Nothing short of saving your own life. And you might be listening to me, my life's pretty good. My life works. You don't know me. I said,
oh, cover that. I don't want to misquote you. I don't want to give away, but I love your quote about your ability to delude yourself and then your life not working, and just so. And I think that was a really powerful way, when I've heard you say it before, a really powerful way to communicate that even though I could see what, for lack of a better word, just the game going on. So I could see other people's games, and I understood that it was a game, and I understood when I could and could not play the game, or when I could let it on, that I knew it was a game, more importantly. But you have the quote in there about, it's basically the old adage about hitting rock bottom, but it doesn't have to be like a life devastation. It can just be the moment that you realize,
yes,
yeah, you're in. Just I didn't tee you up great on that, but you know what I'm talking about. Just
to a line in James Hollis's masterpiece, The Middle Passage, on page 43, because I know it well. He says, your middle passage begins when your capacity for self-deception is exhausted. You wake in the morning, find the enemy in the mirror. And what he's pointing to is that, he's pointing to a specific event, but over the course of your lifetime, ideally, there are moments when your capacity for self-deception on smaller scales is exhausted. Like, who am I kidding? I don't know what I'm doing. Who am I kidding trying to save my marriage? There's no chance, given what I know, that I'm going to save my marriage. I have to go and get help.
Right.
I am baffled. There's mysteries that I cannot solve, and I'm doing wrong by my children and my partner. I have to solve this. And it comes back to this point, which is, as arrogant as it might come across, I certainly don't mean it to be. You can't do this on your own. I couldn't do it on my own, and I was more motivated than anybody I've ever met to figure this out because of my own life path. But there's not a chance I could have figured this out. And every time I create a study group, which are my coaching programs, I learn from the groups of the other archetypes. When you suddenly get 4 gorillas together and you start asking them questions, like, they start explaining their paradigm, because there's sort of a front level thing where I can sort of explain it in a diagram, and I can go through positive and negative traits, etc. But until you start asking like really precise stuff, and then suddenly 4 goes, oh no, but that would be like this for us, and they're like, oh yeah, and you're like, wow, there's not a chance I'd have known that. And the same with the wolves. It's like, give them specific circumstances and ask them how they feel about that, and they all almost unanimously say, well, it would be like this. This is all utterly fascinating, because one of the things we have to accept is that we lean heavily towards one of these survival archetypes throughout our lives. B, we have no idea what these other survival archetypes are and how they operate. And I think Jordan Peterson pointed to it, like, archetypes point to values, but it's almost like its values is like the front lever. It's everything else behind everything else. It's not just values. Values are almost something you can choose. This is not the chosen realm. This is deep into the fabric of our being. And by understand, so then the third part then is, you will not be able to, so then the third part is, we typically attract an opposite. So gorillas very rarely marry each other because they want to be in charge. Wolves will often marry each other because they've both become attracted to each other because they're both explicit, and they like to win, and they like having great sex, and they like seduction, and that whole thing is a
And,
great way to...
and wolves are pack animals. They want they want to win together. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But that doesn't lend well to intimacy and kindness with the children if they're not very careful. And they're the ones that will have the blazing rows that the neighbors hear, because neither of them will want to back down. More often than not, a gorilla will get together with a fox. Why? We're getting slightly off topic here, but the gorillas aren't the funniest. They lose their sense of humor first, and they lose lightness first when there's an issue. So when they meet a creative, playful, colorful, mischievous, great ideas kind of playful fox who makes them laugh and giggle and makes them feel alive and free, this creates a lot of attraction, because and then the foxes, oh my God, they're so organized. They don't lose their keys. They've got good money. This is going to be great. They can take care of everything. I'll just flit about. So the wolves and the sheep often come together because in the involuntary realm of involuntary desire, we find attraction, like attraction is not a choice. And often it's because they have this disowned part in us. So more often than not, people get together with an opposing archetype, and everything's fine while the biochemicals are going through the body. But then once the honeymoon period is over, what's left is like, okay, we're going to start having breakdowns. Okay, oh my God, I don't understand you. Who are you? Where did the gentleness go?
Right.
So,
and that's when I've been struggling in this conversation. I've thought of it a couple of times. What is your definition of when my life doesn't work? That phrase you use quite a bit. It's like, you realize your life doesn't work, and that doesn't mean that your life's in shambles, but it has a specific meaning around this.
So it's specifically, I think, around connections that devolve. So either in your family home, your children are not able to speak to you anymore, or you're heading towards divorce in your second marriage, and you don't understand why. You think you're a good person, but you don't understand why. You're attracting this kind of person into your life, and it doesn't make any sense. So another way of looking at it is, your survival archetype makes your life work for 30% of your life. Like if you're a sovereign and you run your own business, that's great. It's going to be great. You're going to run a tight ship, highly organized. You're going to see the whole system, like the whole spider web. You're not going to miss anything. If you're a fox and you're creative and you come up with these great ideas and you start running a business, well, there's a reason why the wastelands of failed businesses are full of highly creative people who couldn't handle the detail.
Right.
And if you're a sheep and you're great at creating connection, you're great with the kids, and you're great doing this, and then you just don't know how to deal with your neighbor, or you don't know how to deal with your eldest son who's suddenly becoming wolfy, so your life's going to stop working. And what I mean, not your life, it's too absolute. I apologize. Let me try and clarify. A major area of your life is going to become like being dragged over gravel.
Your archetype is no longer supporting you for your goal.
Say that again.
Your archetype is no longer getting you closer to your goal.
No, and what most people do is they try even harder using the only thing that they know to resolve that, and it makes it worse. So it's interesting. It's like, we don't try something different. We try harder using the only thing we know, because, like I said earlier, the paradigm is absolute. So that's what I mean. Like. And if you think that there's nothing like that going on in your life right now, if you don't understand these archetypes, it's only a matter of time. It really, really is.
And it probably is going on, and you're just not aware of it.
Being generous, yeah. It really probably is. And put it this way, if you're unable to describe the fundamental operating system of your children, that there's a high chance that's going to cause problems. If you're not able to explain how you deal with upsets and disconnections yourself, and if you're not able to very quickly articulate how what triggers your partner and how to handle them, and I don't mean how to handle them in that kind of wedding card saccharine sweet, well, as long as the wife always wins, none of that nonsense. I mean like really effective, productive ways of describing, okay, what triggers my partner is this, and what she most needs is this.
Yeah.
And that's how we win in life, because you can't avoid irritations and frustrations, but you can exacerbate them like throwing petrol on the fire. You can either put them out immediately, like either they don't start, the circumstances arise, but there's not enough kindling and the fire doesn't start, or the fire does start and there's a bucket of water right there, you just pour it on and then you carry on with your weekend with your beloved. But what most people do is they do the wrong thing and they just pour petrol on it, and then suddenly the whole weekend is ruined. And there's only so many ruined weekends that a marriage can handle before it's either you're living lives of quiet desperation or you're divorcing.
Right.
So again, like another way of confirming what I'm saying, for anyone who's familiar with the work of John Gottman and the Gottman Institute, John Gottman's probably peerless. He's 40 plus years of relationship research, and he created the Love Lab, where he observed real couples having arguments. There's a couple of really important things. Number one, most people argue over, you know what most people argue over?
Who left the socks on the floor?
Absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
Absolutely nothing. And that's exactly what Gottman describes as nothing of any significance at all. But the other thing that he concluded, which is what I concluded myself, is that the number one skill in all relationships is handling breakdowns and reconnecting after a breakdown. It's the number one skill.
Yeah, that's right. That was in the love. Yeah. Invitation of love. That was the, not avoiding breakdowns, but being able to handle breakdowns. Yeah. That's brilliant.
So another way of saying it is, why is this material so important and why should I take notice? Well, this is a PhD in understanding breakdowns. It is.
And to be clear, this is the breakdown with the person at the grocery store telling you should have a mask on, and with your wife, and with your child, and with your boss. And it's the breakdown that basically any time that your modus operandi for dealing with anything is breaking down and you don't see a way out of it.
Yeah. And it's not working. And particularly if you're in a committed relationship with somebody that you know is a good person and you love them and you adore them, and you know that you're slowly chipping away at the fabric of your love for each other, this is vital. There's not a second. Because if you're in that place where you both adore each other, but you're struggling with each other, there's not a second to lose. There really isn't. Because, like I'm not an advocate for people staying together unless it's appropriate. I'm an advocate for divorce when it's appropriate and staying together and fighting if it's appropriate. So I don't have any fixed, rigid dogma about that kind of thing at all. But if people really care about each other and they risk losing something magnificent, then there's not a second to lose. And the thing is, like, I give you my word, like, I hate to make it, I guarantee this will be an absolute revelation and will make a positive difference. So right. It's difficult to imagine any circumstance if you did the work that you wouldn't have tremendous value. And, this is a kind of like a theoretical conversation. It's a bit of a textbook conversation, which is necessary, but you don't have to live in a textbook. Once you understand it, you just start applying it, and everything just starts getting smoother and smoother and smoother, and there's less mystery. And what, of course, shows up in the absence of mystery and disconnection, connection, joy and laughter and intimacy and better sex and better weekends and better sleep and a happier household. And if you've got kids in the home, what's the greatest act of love than raising your kids in a home where there is love and connection and respect? I don't think there's anything trumps that.
And I'd really like to do sort of a non desperation COVID kind of version of this, and specifically talk about the intimacy, the love, like the partner, your significant other, whatever their politically correct thing is to say these days, your husband or wife or whatever you want to call it. That was my introduction to it. But I wanted, in the few minutes we have left, I really want to kind of shamelessly plug for you, because I know you don't plug yourself. You do your work because you're passionate about it and you love it. And if people want to listen, they do. And that's sort of my approach too. Like I'm not invested in whether or not anybody likes this video or any of the other videos I've done. It's if it's helpful for you, listen, and if it's not, it's fine too. Like, I don't really care. And I know you're that way, but I've thanked you personally so many times, and it's hard to not get emotional every time I think about it. The both of the workshops that I've been to of yours were completely life altering, and I don't say that lightly. I mean, I don't. I would assert, and this is made up, I don't know for sure, but I would assert that I probably do more educational programming and retreats, weekend things, courses than most people. Like, I'd say I'm probably in the top 10 to 15% of the population as to how much of that personal growth and education I seek. And everything I do has value. Like everything I've ever gone to has been, yeah, that was pretty good. Yeah, I got this, I got out of that. But when I went to the Invitation of Love in Bali, and that was a unique presentation of that, because we got to digest it over 4 or 5 days as opposed to over a weekend, and we were all sort of secluded and living together. But that literally, and I've told a million people this. Well, it's hyperbole, obviously. I've told everyone who I've ever talked to about this, and I've told you, I know, several times, that it literally shifted my worldview. I came out of that with a completely different understanding of relationships and my part in relationships. And I was specifically applying that to an intimate relationship at the time. But then, I was a little cocky and thinking I really understood your work, and I did the dynamics of power dynamics, whatever it was called when I went through, and I went to that course, and went in there with the intention of learning one thing and came out learning something completely different, but again, completely shifted my worldview of not only the relationship that I knew I was struggling with, but the other struggles that I didn't even know I was having, areas of my life that I thought, well, that's just the way that is. But once I understood these paradigms, once I understood what, as I was learning from you, and I'm sitting there going, oh my gosh, that's what that, like, I have like examples pop up in your head as you're going, as people are listening to you in your workshops. I know I've shared this experience with lots of other people, and I've talked to other guests, and it's just like epiphany after epiphany after, and you start talking about this and you're like, oh my God, oh yes, of course I see myself. Oh yeah, that's what, man, that's that's how my father was. That's how that really, that's why I struggle with my boss. And it's so clear. But then, as we say, it's still almost impossible to rectify that just by understanding it. It gives you some understanding and gives you comfort that it is fixable, but you really have to learn the skills. You have to learn how other people think. You have to practice it. You have to rehearse it. You have to do your not only your training, but those follow-on, coachings where you get to work with other people in a group for months on end. It's a couple of months those follow-up trainings are.
It's 16 weeks and they fly by.
Yeah. And they fly by, and you're dealing every day. You think you understand it, and you'll bring up another exercise, and you're having each archetype weigh in on their understanding of this and how they behave in this and what this means to them. And you're just over and over just going, oh my gosh, that's so clear. I've never understood it that way, but it's so obvious once you hear it. And to me, and both workshops that I went to, and I think I told you this, whether you consider yourself a genius or not, this is genius work. And I measure that by the fact that if I can understand something that I've struggled with for a really long time, and most cases you've struggled with your entire life, and all of a sudden I have an epiphany to where not only do I understand it, but it becomes simplistic, and I'm like, and it's simplistic and it's obvious. It's so obvious. Once you learn it, it's like, of course, but give me the rest of my life to sit there and figure it out. I wouldn't have figured it out. But as soon as I understand it, it's like, oh, that's so obvious in retrospect. So, I cannot, and for the audience listening right now, Roy has yet to drive the business aspect of his work. He's done a great job of employing himself, but I really want to bring his work to America. And I really want to get you out here because I think, like I said, I think your work is genius. It's the most valuable work I've done in my adult life and maybe my entire life. And I don't say that lightly. But how can people get some flavor of your work? How can people get involved with you? they listen to this and they're like, man, I really want to learn what this Rory guy talks about. Like, what are your business offerings out there before I get all of America to suck you up and pull you over here and make you, the icon that you should be? How can people, learn more about your work?
Thank you so much for everything you just said. So the simple answer is if you're in a relationship and you're struggling and it's that, or just you're curious about the survival archetypes piece, the webpage to go to is relationalpowerdynamics.com. Relationalpowerdynamics.com. There's a couple of pages in there that's got lots of information. And there's access to an online workshop that I have as well. So if you'd like to go through the last event that you were in November, all of that footage has been repurposed for an online course. There's a workbook that you can either print out professionally, A4 or B5, depending on your preference. I'm a B5 kind of person myself. And then there's also
Americans don't know what that means, by the way.
Well, whatever the
you have
size.
You have to give us the 8x11 or
I don't know, but like A4, B5.
Right.
That's my headline. And there's also a home print version. So if you're stuck at home, there's a low ink home print version, A4. We've done everything we can to make it accessible for people during COVID. And that's the only place really to go and understand about survival archetypes and how this plays out in your life, whether you realize it or not.
I don't want to give your work away completely, but can you hold up your diagram for maybe just a few seconds so that people can see how you've got that laid out? And this is what's in our head as I'm having this conversation. I mean, this is burned into my hippocampus forever. As you're saying sheep and wolf and gorilla and fox and warrior and lover, like I'm seeing this. And to me, being in my center is staying in that white dot in the middle where I can see everything. Yeah.
And I think, why is that diagram so powerful? It looks so simple, but you can explain every single relationship in your life by that diagram.
Right.
And how if you had a 20-year marriage, you can describe your 20-year marriage through that diagram over the course of time.
Right.
That diagram it's phenomenal. It only took 10,000 hours.
And it's so applicable to every relationship. Like I can't emphasize that enough. Most people I think probably go into your work because of their intimate relationships, but it's equally as powerful as your relationship with your boss, with just the conflict that arises at the store. I remember that exercise that I was talking about earlier where people couldn't figure out the response. Not only do you teach people to immediately understand that archetype and why that person is relieving their pain, as you say, in that way, but I also know how to respond based on a couple of variables. What do I want out of this, right? I can respond one way to diffuse this. I can respond another way if I want to correct the situation, right? Yeah.
Exactly. Like if you're listening to this and thinking, I'm fine at home, maybe it's your business partner, maybe it's your boss, maybe it's your employees, maybe it's your head of sales, I don't know. But every single relationship in your life that matters is going to improve by understanding this.
Yeah.
Every single one.
I can attest to that.
Every single
100%.
one.
Yep.
It's going to improve if you understand this. And I was going to say something earlier about, so you were speaking very kindly and I very much appreciate it, but what came to my mind is like, why do people have these revelations? And the answer I think is very simple. Like, I'm interested in the fundamentals. This is fundamental wisdom. It's not Rory's opinion. These are my findings, and I've run them by the smartest people I know, and I've always done that because I'm on a good day, I'm averagely intelligent, so I have to run it by the smartest people I know, the wisest, maturest people that I know, and they say, yeah, that's exactly the way it is. So I'm interested in fundamental wisdom, not something that's been invented. And the reason why fundamentals are so powerful is because they explain.
Right.
Just explain. They demystify. I'm interested in demystifying the mystery that leads to the misery. If you demystify the misery, the clouds part, and then you can see the path and you can explain that. Why do I keep tripping over and grazing my knee? Oh, there's this thing on the ground. Oh, okay. Couldn't see that before. So relationalpowerdynamics.com for the survival archetypes piece that will improve every relationship in your life. If you're really interested in a deep inquiry into your intimate relationship with your beloved, and the invitationoflove.com, www.invitationoflove.com. There's an online course there that takes people through the fundamentals of how to love someone beautifully. And that shift from the old model of relationships to the new model of relationships is its design to help people make that step from essentially 2,500 years of hand-me-down. I've just lost a word. The hand-me-down, the word for hand-me-down. Like we've inherited this model of ownership and control.
Right.
And action to make that change requires an action.
Right.
And the workshop just lays out that path, and it's highly effective from what I've been told. So
yeah, well, I can attest to that. And then the coaching that goes along with it, and I hope you'll raise the price eventually, because it's ridiculously inexpensive to do the follow-on coaching in those groups. But I mean, just talk about a life. You know, one of the things about when you go to these revolutionary weekends, you know, so you go to like a Tony Robbins event or something, and you get all inspired and elevated for a weekend, and then you go back to your normal life, and it just kind of demutes over time. And, you know, 3-4 months later, you find that you're exactly the same person you were before. And I love the continued training of yours because, you know, let's face it, like just the obligation of having to get on the call and having done your work and be able to talk about your work forces you to reinforce this work. But it's also just the concepts, as you say, like the as you're what was the phrase, the fundamentals that you're putting out there. The fundamentals are easy to understand as the concept, but how do you take actions that support that like, you know, that are aligned with the fundamentals that you're learning? And I found that to be just, you know, endlessly helpful. And I think if I did that every week for the rest of my life, it would still feel the same way. You'll mastering this, you know, so people understand this isn't something that you'll learn over the course of several months and then just be done with it and you've got it fixed. It's like, you know, this is as you say, an inquiry that will lead to, you know, the rest of your life continuing to try to understand these concepts better and better. But you can make leaps and bounds very rapidly because the vast majority, and I would say probably 99% of the world, just does not understand these fundamentals.
No, they don't.
Yeah.
And it's staggering. It's explainable, but it's still staggering. And just going back to your earlier point, like, I mean, I love one of those weekends where, you know, you get pumped up and dance and jump up and down, high five. Like, I don't particularly like the hangover a month later when I feel like I'm back to where I was before. So
right.
I'm not really into the pumping people up and creating a very heightened experience. I don't mind people being deeply moved by the profundity of the work,
right.
But I want people to be able to stay steady so that if you wanted to join essentially a study group and deepen your understanding of it, you know, I don't like going to a weekend that's really profound and then a month later or even a week later, I can't even remember it because life's just taken over again. And that's why I like going over the footage and going through the workbook.
Yeah.
Because that's what makes the roots take. I'm interested in results.
Right.
Like that's the thing. Like why? I'm interested in results. Why? Because if I do this work, then there's a chance that the adults will violate their children less. That's the gift.
And each other.
And each other.
Yeah.
It's, you know, it's like it's difficult. You know, I really appreciate you saying it in your own words, but from my perspective, I'm still staggered. Even after all these years, I'm staggered by how powerful this work is. I feel incredibly blessed to be the person that discovered it in my own words and is able to impart it. But I'm staggered at how profound and how powerful it is.
Yeah, well, me too. All right, so there's also RoryKilmartin.com, right? Is that
Yeah, so you can find me there as well. There's a bit of information there.
And you have your LinkedIn and Facebook. I don't know how active you are on those, but you have pages there as another way for people to
I'm
learn a
not
little bit more about you.
particularly that active on that. I'm focusing on my book right now. But what I will say, if you're listening, is if you like this and you go to these pages and you want to reach out to me, please drop me an email. There's links on those 2 pages. It would be great to hear from you. Just say, hey, I was listening to Doc Parsley's podcast and I'm really interested in your work. It'd be a pleasure to meet you. And if I can find the time, I'll have a call with you.
All right, and we'll list in the show notes beneath this we'll list your URLs, and anything else. We can talk to my marketing team before they put all this together, and we'll make sure that we list anything else that you find useful for helping people learn more about your work. And what can I say, my friend? I enjoy every conversation, even when we're allowing other people in and we're with the intention of letting other people share it. It's always a breath of fresh air to talk to you. I always feel encouraged and more optimistic about life after talking with you. I really appreciate you coming on and chatting. And I hope that everybody listening takes some step towards understanding the depth of your work more. There's no body of work that I recommend more.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for coming on.
Thank you for inviting me.
Okay. We'll end it there. And with the promise to the audience that one day we're going to come back and talk about in the not so distant future, we'll call it that, come on and talk specifically about intimate relationships. And I can beat your drum for you as to all the stuff that I learned from you and how powerful that has been for me. So
it'd be my pleasure. Before we sign off, just wishing everybody all the best during these challenging times. I wish you all the best.
All right. Thanks a lot, buddy. I'll talk to you soon.